Hey, and today I want to talk about a technique in this game called punch drifting. Punch drifting is quite a complex technique in this game, and on Switch it has different uses compared to the global version. But as many of us know, Unite is coming out and Switch controls will no longer be used, though the technique is still vastly used among the game on global controls. We will still talk about when to use it based on the Switch controls, but mainly on the global controls. The first thing to mention is simply how to perform a punch drift. It seems complicated at first and will involve some trial and error to do. To simply put it though, you must start a drift, and then during that drift, around 1 second or more after you start the drift, you press the nitro button once, while still holding down the drift button. Two things will either happen. Your car will either be bumped up slightly on its front wheels, or the car will straighten out briefly. Here is an example of the car's front wheel bouncing. Here is an example of the car straightening out. But why does this happen? For the most part, a car that has more floaty capabilities will bounce more during a punch drift. If a car is more planted, then the harder it'll be to get a bouncy punch drift. For example, the Apollo N is a car that is super planted to the ground, where a punch drift is still going to be useful, but it won't look the same as if you were to punch drift on a Yesco. This bounce does not make the punch drift better or worse, and in fact, on global controls, the bounce that you would get on the front wheel happens more times than it doesn't. This is just due to the difference in game mechanics from global to Switch. Another important note to mention for punch drifting is to make sure that on drifts where you have to do a punch drift, you only do it at maximum 2 times. The reason for this is because you actually lose more speed doing many punch drifts along a drift instead of just doing one punch drift, as seen in this clip here. I am not sure why it is this way, but this is consistent for both Switch and global controls. I mentioned earlier that Switch's punch drifts are used differently from when global would usually do them. This is because of Switch's gasless drifts being a pseudo punch drift. What this means is that on global controls, to maintain speed on short turns or even long turns, they would need to do a punch drift. But on Switch, we would get the same effect as a global's punch drift by simply doing a gasless drift. If we take a look at the side-by-side of a Switch gasless on Kairo's 360-degree turn and global's punch drift on the same turn, we can see that both are slightly similar in speed droppage. Currently, for Switch, we only use punch drift after landing from a ramp that has a sharp turn afterwards. This is because you can't get full gasless effects immediately after landing from a ramp, since your speed drops drastically. Usually, when you land from a ramp and the path is straight after the ramp, you would just do brake nitro to keep the speed loss from dropping too much. But if there is a turn immediately after a ramp, we must do a punch drift to maintain the speed. This is the same as on global, and you can see it in this clip right here. Moving forward into Unite, punch drifting will become more useful to the average Switch player. It is and will be important to learn how to do. And just to clarify, the way I explained everything is the exact same for a for a Switch player using tilt and sticks. So, to recap, on Switch, punch drifts can be used in limited areas, but on global controls, it can be used on most turns. Do not do 2 or more punch drifts on any turn. It doesn't matter how long it is. The most you should do is 2, and that should really only be on the Cairo 360-degree turn. These last 2 are for when we go to Unite. That being to make sure that on a long drift, you do a punch nitro 1 second after you start the drift. And lastly, if the drift is short, it is better to do a punch drift immediately, as shown in this clip right here. Alright, well, thank you guys for watching, and I hope it helped.